Do film strength testers tell the truth? Do the results really correlate to an actual engine? Hi, I'm Lake, the motor oil geek, and because many people and products use film strength data, let's find out if it can be trusted. For the last 50 years or so, this device has been used to test motor oils and additives. Unfortunately, those results don't always correlate with what actually happens in a real engine. You might be asking, how can that be? How can so many people be wrong? How can that device be deceptive? Well, first off, no API or OEM motor oil approval requires passing this test. If it was accurate, it would save millions of dollars every year in engine testing. Places like Southwest Research and Intertech wouldn't need all those dynamometers if this could tell you the truth. But don't take my word for it. George Plint, whose company makes these devices, says they don't correlate to actual engines. As George points out in his training on these devices, it uses a bearing steel on bearing steel contact. Well, that's not found anywhere in an engine. And as we showed in our video about the Strybeck curve, the 3 stages of lubrication, this device only simulates the boundary condition. In fact, it goes beyond that to an extreme pressure. Since the ASTM test method for this device clearly states is for determining the extreme pressure properties of the lubricant, we're going to need an extreme pressure oil to set our baseline. That's right. This device was developed to test gear oils and greases, not motor oil. Our test candidates are going to be the Castrol Classic GTX, the high zinc formulation, along with regular Castrol GTX, which is the API SP specification, and our GL5 gear oil. Let's get started. Let's start with the Castrol GTX Classic, the high zinc formulation. So the Castrol Classic GTX could hold all 5 weights and not seize up. Now, we'll measure the wear scar and see how large of a wear scar it created. Fun fact, a 75/90 gear oil is actually about the same measured viscosity as a 20/50 engine oil. That's right, the SAE gear oil viscosity grades don't stack on top of engine oils. They actually run parallel. The reason for the higher number on a gear oil is so that people wouldn't accidentally put a gear oil in their engine. Okay, new bearing in race installed. Time for the regular Castrol GTX. So the regular GTX only got to 3 weights before it seized up. Let's take a look at that wear scar. Okay, Project Farm viewers, please know that this video is not attacking Todd or disparaging any of his efforts. In fact, I really like the cold flow test he does after the evaporation test, looking at the difference between the unheated oil and the post-heated oil. Cold flow is really helpful. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people using the bearing tester to make claims about oil that aren't always true. Okay, time for the gear oil. Okay, so the gear oil could handle all 5 of the weights, and it only had a little bit of step change in sound toward the very end. Let's see what that wear scar looks like. Fun fact about our bearing tester. This device was developed by Timken in the 1930s. If you remember from our history of motor oil video, that was before additives were created. And the quality of the crude oil affected the performance of the lubricating oil. The idea was to place a light load on the bearing to make sure it wouldn't seize with that oil. It was called the Timken OK load. But clever marketers took hold of this device and found that certain additives could make it hold even more load, but that isn't always what's best for your engine. I also have some of the super special gear oil that High Performance Lubricants made from my dad's race car. Let's try it out and see how it works. Wow. So the super special gear oil made no change in sound, even with all 5 weights applied. Check that out. That is the smallest scar we've seen yet, by far. So does that mean you should use gear oil in your engine? Of course not. Let's go look at some test results using the TE77 reciprocating rig, that ring on liner test, to see how these oils did in that environment. So what we're looking at is a 3-dimensional trace of the surface roughness of the cylinder liner section that ran in that TE77 ring on liner test. Essentially, this is a wear scar trace from top to bottom. Imagine taking a sample top to bottom of that liner right down the middle, and you can see the red ends on both sides are where it's not run. And the area in between is where the piston ring was rubbing. And this is with the gear oil. So this is the amount of wear on that piston ring and liner section with the oil that did the best in the bearing tester. And you can see where there's more wear near the ends, where the piston ring is slowing down and getting into that boundary condition. Because you can see all 3 stages of lubrication on these results. In the middle, where there's still some red, that's when the oil was in that full film hydrodynamic regime, where it wasn't rubbing or touching the liner. But as we neared ring reversal, we can see that wear taking place on both ends of this ring and liner section. And when we look at the ring itself, you can see some really weird pot marks and abrasion on the coating. So this gear oil didn't do a really great job with the ring and liner test. So now let's look at the results from the Castrol Classic GTX. And we can see somewhat of a similar pattern here compared to the gear oil. it's better than the gear oil. There's still the area in the middle where there's still some red, not as much green showing through in the boundary condition, no blue really coming through. So it's definitely doing a better job in protecting that ring and liner section compared to the gear oil. And when we look at the ring, we can see definitely some improvement here. Nowhere near that same pockmarked effect that we saw from the gear oil. The ring looks a little bit better. The coating is still intact here and not coming off. But when we look at the Castrol GTX, that API SP formula, the game changes. You can see very little wear on this trace. It's excellent. The only thing that wore off is some of the peaks, and that was just initially. In fact, these two samples, the GTX and the GTX Classic, are the two samples that threw us off when only looking at the ICP, the used oil analysis data. Because the wear particles here with the Castrol GTX, that API SP formula, were so small that we can see all of them in the used oil analysis. With the Castrol Classic GTX, the wear was more severe and generated larger wear debris that couldn't be seen by the ICP method, which initially made us think these results were the opposite of what they really were. But with this 3D profilometer data, we can clearly see that the API SP formula did a better job than the Castrol Classic GTX, that older API SJ formula, and it did a better job than the gear oil. So these results are completely opposite of what we saw with the bearing tester. Now let's look a little bit closer at the chemistry between these two oils that tells a big story. The key difference between these two oils lies in the calcium and phosphorus levels. Calcium is a detergent additive in motor oils that also has some extreme pressure properties. So when we look at that Castrol Classic GTX, we can see that it has 3,700 parts per million of calcium compared to only 980 parts per million for the Castrol GTX API SP formula. Now that SP formula has a lower level of phosphorus, which comes from the ZDDP, compared to that Castrol Classic. So the balance of the calcium and the phosphorus changed dramatically between these two oils. There's more EP additive in the Castrol Classic GTX versus the Castrol GTX API SP. Now the real key is which of these tests actually more closely aligns to a real engine. Unfortunately, all the work I did at Driven developing oils for flat tappet camshafts, we have those results to share with you right now. We ran hundreds of flat tappet camshaft wear tests, and working with the guys at Comp Cams, we were able to use their ADCOL measuring device that can measure to a millionth of an inch. So we can measure all 16 cam lobes and accurately measure how much wear occurred with different oils. So let's look at these results pretty closely with an eye on that calcium to phosphorus ratio and see how it affects actual engine wear. And as we mentioned in one of our early videos about Mobil 1 1550 and Valvoline VR1 2050, those oils improved when they went from the old API SM formula to the new API SP formula. That reduction in calcium and sodium to prevent low-speed pre-ignition in modern direct injection engines actually caused those oils to improve. You can see right here, the old formulas of both Mobil 1 and Valvoline VR1 had over 2,000 parts per million calcium. Despite having a higher level of phosphorus, it didn't matter. Those oils both produced over 5 microns of wear per camshaft lobe. But when they changed the formulas and reduced the calcium, eliminated the sodium, additives that have EP additives but compete against the phosphorus, what happened? The wear went down. The wear with the API SP version of Mobile One 1550 dropped the wear below 2 microns, where it used to be over 5 microns. With the Valvoline VR1, it went from over 7 microns to less than 2.5 microns. And even the previous generation of Castrol GTX, which was API SN, that had 2,000 parts per million calcium, did better than those older iterations of both Mobile One and Valvoline VR1. And what you can see here from these results is there's a clear trend. The lower the level of calcium with a higher level of phosphorus provides better.
Hey Florida homeowners, did you know you can get paid thousands up front to upgrade your AC unit, windows, roof, or even go solar with no money?
Better wear protection. That balance between the calcium and the phosphorus is the key to anti-wear protection. So now that you've seen high calcium levels can negatively affect engine wear, let's see what adding some calcium can do to the bearing tester results. You see, this is Afton's high-tech 611. It's a calcium sulfonate detergent. Now, remember from our videos about low-speed pre-ignition, too much calcium sulfonate can cause low-speed pre-ignition, which causes engine damage. Let's add some high-tech 611 to the regular GTX and see what happens. Let's see what happens now. How about that? So without the extra calcium, the GTX failed at 3 weights. With the extra calcium, it went to 5 weights and still didn't seize. But we know that adding more calcium negatively affects engine wear and can cause low-speed pre-ignition. So more calcium's not better, which is the whole point of making this video. This device doesn't tell you the truth about additives or motor oils for an actual engine. I know this video might be controversial and it might hurt some feelings, but I'd have been a fraud and a hypocrite if I didn't make it. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.